Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be going over something that I firmly believe with all of my heart and soul, which is that combat in pretty much every role-playing game sucks. Okay? I hate the combat in Dungeons and Dragons. I hate the combat in Call of Cthulhu slightly less, and I have learned how to get around my hatred in both games and in all role-playing games. And that is very simple. And I'm going to go over it with you guys. But this is going to be specifically for Call of Cthulhu because this is Deathstroke 9. So, if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and get ready for some great content. Now, first off, I want to say that Call of Cthulhu is a game where combat is highly discouraged. And the investigators, if they get into combat, one great thing about Call of Cthulhu that makes it, in my opinion, better than D&D combat-wise, is that combat is lethal. So the players try to get into a fight, they get shot, they are dead. Very simple and clear-cut. However, this is a question that I get asked a lot and that I ponder all the time, is how to make combat more exciting, how to make it more streamlined, and how to make it just work better and flow better with the game, the rest of the game, because the rest of the game is so simple in rule-wise. And then you get to combat and everything's suddenly a bunch of nitpicking over rules. And that brings me to my first point. But before I get to my first point, I just want to say that some of the advice I'm going to be giving is not... Like, normally on my channel, a lot of the videos that I make for Call of Cthulhu Keepers are all my own thoughts. I'm probably not the first person to have said it, but I've never read it anywhere else, and I'm trying to give you, the most personal to me advice that I can give, right? And I try to come up with unique takes on things. However, in this video, only about 50% of it is mine. The other half is Sandy Peterson's, because he has a lot of really great advice on horror gaming in general, and specifically for combat, some of his advice, it comes in very useful, and I'm going to be reiterating some of the things that he has said. Anyway, 2.1, combat, like every other rule in the game, is a suggestion, not a rule. Because the point of Call of Cthulhu is not the rules. And just like every other role-playing game, the idea is to have fun and build a collaborative story together, right? We all know the drill by this point. You know what I say. So when it comes to combat, I try to streamline things. Go with whatever seems to make sense at the time. And this might be a controversial opinion, and I'm going to say it's just that. It's an opinion. You do not have to do this. I'm not telling anyone they have to do this. This is what works for me as a keeper, and I don't even always do it, but a lot of times I will make up easier to use rules on the spot. So instead of using the normal chase rules or the normal gun rules, I'll say, look, for this gun, 95 to 100 is a malfunction. Other than that, you could shoot one time in a turn. You roll against your thing to see if you hit. They roll against their dodge, see if they can manage to escape it. You roll first because, again, we're trying to emphasize speed here because rolling the dice is not that much fun. And it's not the highlight of the game. And it's a lot more fun when you're trying to pass a skill roll, right? But when you're fighting, you're trying to get everything, the rolling and the stats and the math done over with as quick as possible because it essentially breaks the atmosphere of the game, pulls everyone out of the game into a meta state of mind. The entire concept of the dice in a game that the players use is a metagaming a mindset, which is why I have been recently looking into diceless rule systems, but I'm going to continue on. So when you roll, for attack, you'll tell the player to roll first. See if they hit, because if they miss, like if they fail, then they've already lost. At least by my rules. I know that their rules is more of whoever gets a higher level of failure or success. But if the player tries to shoot and they fail the roll to shoot initially, or anything like that, or tries to hit, I say you missed and move on. All right, so that's one way to streamline it, is to forego half the rolls, really. I mean, unless they hit. Next, I'm going to use one of Sandy Peterson's greatest things, which is on description. And he talks about using at least 3 of the 5 senses. And I guess I'll just reiterate that here. So, especially in a horror game, description is extremely important and adds a lot of color to everything. And essentially, that's all description is. It's adding color to things, but it's very important to get for atmosphere and mood and to evoke the right feeling from the game, right? So when you, as a keeper, are describing things, you want to think about how every person has 5 senses. See, smell, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, right? And you look at these 5 senses and then take a look at your general descriptions. It's a white door in a large room, right? Like a lot of dungeon masters, or at least amateur dungeon masters, they'll describe everything you see. And when you're playing Call of Cthulhu, a visceral and vivid and scary imagery needs to be more than just imagery. You need to tell them how the thing smells, how it feels in the room. Does it, the aura it's giving off, the sounds they're hearing, plus the sight, what they see. Taste can be so. Taste and smell can both be extremely potent ways of getting a sense of disgust in your game. And my point in saying all this, and Sandy Peterson says to evoke at least 3 senses, or simulate at least 3 senses in your descriptions, very specifically on all of your horrific descriptions, or all the more important ones. Try to get at least 3 different senses touched in there, or stimulated, whatever you want to say. And the reason I'm going over this is because when you're doing combat in Call of Cthulhu, when something gets hit, you want to describe it. You want that to be the reward. So once they finish rolling the dice, you want them to finish rolling the dice as quickly as possible, streamline it, and make their reward for rolling the dice them getting this flavor text and doing their damage. And one great thing about damage in Call of Cthulhu is all damage is damage. There is no different types of damage. I mean, I guess you could say magical damage kind of is considered a type, but the damage it hurts, right? It always hurts, and it's going to do exactly what it sounds like it's going to do. And it's up to you to decide. And that's one thing that I love about this system, is that it gives me as a keeper so much room to do what must be done. Whereas when a kobold in Dungeons & Dragons has a spear, and he has an attack that does piercing damage, the spear does piercing damage, that assumes that he will always poke. But with Call of Cthulhu, it says, it'll say, here's a kobold, he has a spear, and he does, if he hits, he'll do 1d4 damage. Now, instead of saying piercing damage and making you think of only poking, you've got so many different ways for them to use that spear. Then the Call of Cthulhu's monster descriptions will also tell you they can also punch and kick, do the same general amount of damage, which allows you to put so many different flavors of combat into the game. Whereas with D&D, back and forth will get monotonous very quickly. Also, maneuvers in Call of Cthulhu will make for very interesting gameplay, which basically means a more complex thing that normally an enemy would try to do. Such as uprooting a tree and throwing it at the investigators, which would be a makeshift weapon. And then you could go to the rule book and do some nitpicking over stats, or you can make a gut call and say this is going to do 1d10, 2d10, 3d10 damage, right? And that goes into my number one rule for all role-playing is that the dungeon master, the keeper, the game master is always correct, and you need to streamline the rules in favor of keeping a good story and keeping a good pace going. Moving on. My next point that I'd like to make is on dice. Now, there are two different ways for you to make combat, and you've got to do it. You cannot do it thoughtlessly, because these are the main two ways to roll dice anyway, which is either hidden or not hidden. But if you consciously put effort into your choice of whether to do it hidden or not hidden, it will make the combat more interesting. And here's what I mean by that. If you choose to roll dice out in the open as the keeper, you need to make sure you have every player's attention when you roll dice in front of them. Why? Because if you've chosen to roll dice in front of all the players, you have made the choice of it's all weighed in on the dice. There will be no help from the heavens. There's nothing that can save them now. Cold, hard chance is it. And this works extremely well when you do not use the optional luck rule in Call of Cthulhu. Or if you just discount most of it. Like the luck roll has two parts where one is making luck rolls, like checks, and the other is spending luck. But anyway, that's besides the point. So when you make a conscious choice to roll dice in front of the players, you're essentially trying to scare them. And by just having a sense of atmosphere and just looking them in the eye as you roll the dice and make everything weighed in on that, that can increase their enjoyment of combat and of the number crunching in general. Then, if you choose the opposite, you need to make a conscious choice as well. Because if you're rolling behind a screen or hidden, which is what I normally do, you have a lot of leeway then. And because the game's a collaborative game, and because your job as the keeper, if you're going to... See, this can get misconstrued, so let me just get this out of the way right off the bat. If you roll dice behind a screen and fudge rolls for your own gain, or to for the detriment of the story for whatever reason, for some type of selfish reason, you're basically cheating. If you fudge rolls to keep a player alive, or make sure a story point hits, or you see that they fail, you roll to see if they have perceived something and they don't, and then you realize that something is integral to the plot and you allow them to see it anyway, and instead hold something against them later, anything like that, that's all acceptable. If you and the player were arguing over a rule earlier, and then you suddenly decide that a dark young appears out of the forests and runs up at them, and then you roll behind the screen and you see that the dark young definitely critically failed, but you change it to saying, oh, you got hit and you take 1,000,000 damage and you're dead. That's then you're not doing your job, and you should also not be playing as a keeper. If you're like that, you probably should not be playing role-playing games at all, because you would be booted from a real group. But I digress. Moving along, I'm going to say that when you have the screen in front of you and you roll behind that screen, you now have all the power to change the rules. And with great power comes great responsibility. When you see that a player's about to die, they're about to take 33 damage and they've got 10 health. And you're like, well, be pretty anticlimactic if they die here. I mean, this is really only the technical first act. We're still things are only heating up. Did not really mean for them to critically fail like this. So instead, you say, all right, you drop to 0 hit points, and you tell them they lose a limb, or they have to go to the hospital for weeks or something like that. Fudging rolls like this can help you as a keeper to do a lot. And in combat, it can definitely make sure that everything stays balanced, especially since Call of Cthulhu is a fundamentally kind of unbalanced game, with the monsters having so much ridiculous amounts of power. Sometimes a fudge roll is the only way to stay away from a TPK. So, second point would be you can either roll in front of the players or roll behind a screen. Make sure it's a conscious choice, and make sure, because if you make it a choice, if you put effort into what choice you make, you can bring a new level of, enjoyment for the players as they realize the tense moment that you're rolling in front of them, and this roll will decide everything. So now it's no longer boring. Let me think. What else? What else can make combat more interesting? Flavor texts. I cannot stress the importance of keeping descriptions in there. And I cannot stress enough the importance of cutting it short when it needs to be cut short. And that is something that all game masters need to develop a feel for. If the game is slowing down, or if for some reason it seems like the players are not having as much fun, or they've stopped enjoying the game and are sitting around discussing the rules, or they're going back and forth in a fight, that is when you need to put the battle to an end. And you need to develop a sense of when to end a scene, when to end a fight. And this is a general rule for all keepers, is that you need to understand this so that as you go through your story, you have scenes of the correct length. Some scenes will organically come to a close, others will not. And you're going to have to put an end to them and move on to the next. Or else your players are going to get bored as heck. I know, because I've been in multiple games of Dungeons & Dragons. I've run multiple games of Dungeons & Dragons where the game has slowed down to a halt because of combat. Which was the main reason I went looking for another system, and thank God I did. Moving along, let's see. Is there any final note on how to make combat more interesting? I would also definitely put thought into your monsters. And I have a whole video on monster creation. I highly recommend you check it out. I think I'm going to put it right there. It will help you create memorable monsters. And that is key when crafting any combat encounter, because combat needs to feel different. It can't just feel like two guys shooting a gun at each other, especially in Call of Cthulhu. And you want the monster to have something more than one attack, and you want these attacks to be utterly uncanny. Obviously, an exception to this is a brawl with a cultist, but often a brawl with a cultist can be brought to a close very quickly. And final disclaimer, again, I understand that many people do not play like this. They like the game, they like going over the statistics, they like power gaming. That's a totally different style of gameplay than I enjoy and than my usual group of players enjoy. And this is what works for me personally, and I understand that there are people who think that keepers should always roll in front of the players, should never fudge rolls, and should always abide exactly by the rules. But the rules are there as guidelines, and in this game, which to me is about building a cool, interesting, scary story, I'm going to fudge the rules sometimes if it's in the interests of my game. And that is about it. So yeah, use flavor text. Make sure you understand what the choices you're making when you go to roll, and streamline it as much as possible. make it over as fast as possible because no one likes sitting around number crunching. And you want it to be fast-paced. Now, this video went on way longer than I thought it would, so let me just wrap this up. If you are new here, please subscribe to my channel, like this video. I probably said that already, but screw it. In fact, bleed out the subscribe button till it turns gray and lifeless. And check out some of my other videos if you want. Yeah. I hate combat in most role-playing games, so I should have made this video. This should have been one of my first videos, but for some reason after I come up with all these ideas for this and wrote them down, I just kind of have always run like that, and I've forgotten that there was a thought process behind it in the first place, which is good. One of the best things about this channel for me personally is that it allows me to explore my own process and then give you all, how I go about doing things. So yeah, thank you guys for all the support. Without you, the Legion would be nothing. Now, I will see you all later. Deathstroke 9 out.